Emma Carter woke to the sound of something heavy slamming into the ground. The rhythmic thud echoed through the house, setting her nerves on edge. She sat up in bed, her heart already racing. It was too early for construction or delivery trucks. The neighborhood, nestled in its quiet cul-de-sac, was usually serene this time of the morning. Frowning, she slipped on her robe and headed to the window overlooking her backyard. Her breath caught. Her beautifully tended garden, her sanctuary of flowers and peace, was being torn apart by machinery. Two large excavators churned up the soil, ripping out her tulips and hydrangeas. Workers in hard hats barked instructions to one another, moving about as if they owned the place. Her white picket fence, which marked the boundary of her land, lay in pieces on the ground like discarded matchsticks. Panic surged through her as she rushed outside. The morning air was crisp, but Emma barely noticed. She waved her arms, yelling to get the workers' attention. "Stop. What are you doing? This is private property," she shouted, her voice trembling with anger. A burly man wearing a fluorescent vest and a hard hat turned to her. He was holding a clipboard, and his expression was indifferent, as if this was just another job to get through before lunch. "Ma'am, we're just following orders," he said, barely glancing at her. "The homeowner association authorized this project. You'll need to take it up with them." Emma's hands balled into fists at her sides. "Authorized? This is my land. I didn't approve anything." The man sighed, flipping through papers on his clipboard. "Look, it's all here. This area was designated for the new pool clubhouse in the community improvement plan. I suggest you talk to your homeowner association president if you've got a problem." Before she could respond, he turned back to shout instructions at the crew. Emma's protests were drowned out by the roar of machinery. Furious and confused, she stormed back into the house to find her paperwork. Her home office was a small corner of the dining room, cluttered with receipts, utility bills, and the occasional unopened flyer from the homeowner association. Digging through her files, she pulled out the deed to her property. The document clearly outlined her ownership of the land, from the house to the very fence line that was now destroyed. She stared at it, her pulse pounding in her ears. How could this be happening? She grabbed her phone and dialed the homeowner association's office number, her hands shaking as she pressed the buttons. The line rang several times before going to voicemail. Gritting her teeth, she called again, this time selecting the option to be transferred to the homeowner association president, Karen Mitchell. Karen picked up on the third ring. "Hello, this is Karen," came the overly cheery voice. "Karen, it's Emma Carter," Emma began, trying to keep her voice steady despite her anger. "I need to know what the hell is going on in my backyard. Why are there construction crews tearing it apart?" There was a pause before Karen responded, her tone shifting to one of practiced politeness. "Oh, Emma. Yes, the pool clubhouse project. Isn't it exciting? It's going to be such a great addition to our community." "Exciting." Emma's voice rose. "You've taken over my backyard without my permission. This is private property, Karen. You can't just decide to build on it." Karen sighed, as if Emma were being unreasonable. "Actually, Emma, it's all perfectly legal. During the last homeowner association meeting, we voted to reclassify certain parcels of land to better serve the community. Your property was part of that decision. It's in the minutes. I'm sure you saw the email." Emma's mouth fell open. "Are you kidding me? I never agreed to this, and I definitely didn't get any email about my land being reclassified." "Well, that's unfortunate," Karen said, her voice dripping with insincerity. "But the project is already underway. You should have raised your concerns during the planning stages." Emma gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. "This is theft, Karen. I have the deed to this property. You have no right." "Emma," Karen interrupted, her tone sharpening. "The homeowner association has the authority to make decisions in the best interest of the community. I suggest you review the bylaws. If you have further concerns, you're welcome to file a formal complaint. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to." The line went dead. Emma stared at the phone, disbelief and rage coursing through her. She had always known the homeowner association was overbearing, sending notices about grass height and mailbox colors, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. She stepped outside again, her eyes scanning the destruction. Her once pristine backyard was now a war zone. The fence that had taken her weeks to paint was shattered. The flower beds she'd planted with her late husband were gone, replaced by muddy trenches. A pang of sadness mixed with her fury. This wasn't just property, it was her home, her memories. Emma spotted one of her neighbors, Miss Thompson, peeking out from her window. The elderly woman gave Emma a sympathetic look but quickly disappeared behind the curtain. It was clear no one wanted to cross the homeowner association, not even to support her. Emma returned to the house and sat at her kitchen table, her head in her hands. She felt powerless. The homeowner association's bureaucracy was a tangled web, and Karen was at its center, wielding her authority like a weapon. But Emma wasn't going to let them get away with this. She began gathering everything she could: her property deed, photos of her backyard before the construction, and the homeowner association's latest newsletters. As she flipped through one of the newsletters, she noticed a small paragraph buried on the second-to-last page. It vaguely mentioned reallocation of land for community improvements, but there were no specifics, no mention of her property. Emma's jaw clenched. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a deliberate attempt to steamroll her rights. She snapped a photo of the newsletter and sent it to her lawyer with a brief message: emergency. Need to meet ASAP. For the rest of the day she watched from her window as the construction continued. The workers paid no attention to her glares or the camera she used to document every move. By evening, her once beautiful backyard was unrecognizable, a mess of dirt, debris, and metal framework. As the sun set, Emma felt the weight of the fight ahead. She didn't know how she would stop the homeowner association, or even if she could. But one thing was certain: she wouldn't let them take her home without a battle. Emma Carter spent the night tossing and turning, her mind racing with anger and disbelief. The sight of her destroyed backyard haunted her. By the time the first rays of dawn crept through her bedroom window, she was already up, brewing a pot of coffee and reviewing the documents she had gathered the day before. The deed to her property was clear: her backyard was hers, with no easements or exceptions for public use. Yet the homeowner association's heavy machinery continued to churn the soil as though none of that mattered. She knew she needed help. By mid-morning, Emma was sitting across from her lawyer, David Rowe, in his modest office downtown. David was a practical man in his early 50s, with glasses perched on the edge of his nose and a no-nonsense demeanor that Emma found reassuring. She handed him the documents, her hands trembling slightly. "They've stolen my property," Emma said, her voice taut with frustration. "They're building a pool clubhouse on it without my permission. Karen Mitchell says it's all legal, but it can't be. Can it?" David flipped through the papers, his brow furrowing as he read. "This is unusual," he admitted after a moment. "I've seen homeowner associations overstep their boundaries, but outright seizing private property? That's extreme. Let's start by confirming if they have any legal grounds to claim this land." He picked up the phone and called the county clerk's office to verify the property records. After a few minutes on hold, he hung up, his expression grim. "Your deed is valid," David said. "The land is legally yours. But the homeowner association filed a notice of reclassification with the county a few months ago. They claim it was approved in a community vote." Emma felt her stomach churn. "A vote? I never saw anything about a vote. And even if there was one, how could that override my deed?" David nodded. "It shouldn't. Property rights are protected under state law, and reclassification doesn't usually apply to privately owned land without the owner's consent. But homeowner associations can be crafty. If they buried the notice in fine print or manipulated the vote, they might think they can get away with it." Emma's jaw tightened. "So what can I do?" "We'll start with a cease and desist letter," David said. "That should at least pause construction until we can figure out their game plan. But be prepared, Emma. Homeowner associations like this don't back down easily. This could get ugly." By the time Emma left the office, the letter was already being drafted. She returned home feeling a flicker of hope. But when she arrived, her optimism evaporated. The construction site had grown. Large wooden beams were being erected where her garden once stood, forming the skeleton of the clubhouse. Workers moved with precision, ignoring her presence entirely. Emma pulled out her phone and began filming. She narrated each shot, documenting the destruction of her property and the progress of the construction. If the homeowner association wanted a fight, she would make sure she had evidence to back her case. The next day, David's cease and desist letter was delivered to the homeowner association. Emma watched from her front porch as the delivery person handed the envelope to Karen Mitchell herself. Karen, dressed in her usual tailored suit and pearls, read the letter with a smirk before casually handing it off to one of her assistants. By the end of the week, Emma received the homeowner association's response. It was a dismissive 2-page letter, claiming the reclassification was in the best interest of the community and that Emma's objections were unfounded. They provided no evidence of a vote or any legal justification for their actions. Instead, they doubled down, stating that the project would continue as planned. Furious, Emma decided to dig deeper. She spent hours scouring the homeowner association's website, looking for meeting minutes, financial records, or anything that could explain how this had happened. The records were sparse, but she found a clue in a poorly scanned document labeled Community Development Plan. Buried in the middle of the document was a vague mention of land reallocation for recreational facilities. The language was so obscure that most residents likely wouldn't have noticed it, let alone understood its implications. Emma also discovered something even more troubling. Karen Mitchell and several board members owned homes on the opposite side of the neighborhood far from the construction site. Their properties would see a significant increase in value with the addition of a pool clubhouse, while Emma's home would lose its privacy and appeal. It was a calculated move, designed to benefit a select few at Emma's expense. Armed with this information, Emma reached out to her neighbors. She knocked on doors, explained her situation, and asked if anyone remembered voting on the project. Most of them shook their heads, admitting they hadn't attended recent meetings or read the homeowner association's emails. A few sympathized with her plight but were reluctant to get involved, fearing retaliation from the homeowner association. One neighbor, however, offered a glimmer of hope. Sarah Jennings, a retired schoolteacher who had lived in the neighborhood for decades, invited Emma in for tea. "I've seen this kind of thing before," Sarah said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Karen runs the homeowner association like it's her personal kingdom. Most people are too scared to stand up to her. But if you're willing to fight, I'll back you up." Encouraged by Sarah's support, Emma continued her campaign. She created a petition demanding transparency from the homeowner association and shared her story on social media. Photos and videos of the construction site spread quickly, drawing outrage from people both inside and outside the community. Comments flooded in, with many calling for an investigation into the homeowner association's practices. But the backlash also brought consequences. The homeowner association retaliated by fining Emma for minor violations, such as leaving her trash cans out too long or having unauthorized garden decor. The fines were petty but frequent, designed to wear her down. Emma refused to be intimidated. She filed a formal complaint with the state's housing authority and contacted local reporters, hoping to draw more attention to her case. One journalist, intrigued by the story, agreed to interview her for an investigative piece. As the days passed, Emma felt the weight of the battle growing heavier. She was exhausted, but the thought of giving up never crossed her mind. The homeowner association had underestimated her resolve, and she was determined to make them regret it. Late one evening, as she sat at her kitchen table surrounded by stacks of paperwork, her phone buzzed with a message from David. "Good news. I found a legal precedent that could shut this down. Let's talk tomorrow." Emma allowed herself a small smile. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. The fight wasn't over, but she was finally gaining ground. Emma Carter woke up early, her heart heavy yet defiant. The battle with the homeowner association had consumed her life for weeks, leaving her drained but resolute. The message from her lawyer, David, the night before had given her a rare glimmer of hope, and she clung to it like a lifeline. Today was the day she would meet him to discuss the legal precedent he had uncovered, her best chance to stop the illegal construction and reclaim her backyard. When Emma arrived at David's office, the atmosphere was tense but determined. David greeted her with a folder in hand, his expression serious but optimistic. "I've found a case that's eerily similar to yours," he began, spreading out documents on the desk. In 2015, an homeowner association in a neighboring state attempted to seize private land under the guise of community improvement. The homeowner fought back, and the court ruled that the homeowner association had no legal right to override property deeds without explicit consent. The ruling is strong enough to set a precedent in our state. Emma leaned forward, hope flickering in her chest. "So this could work?" "It could," David said cautiously. "But we need to act quickly." The longer the construction continues, the harder it will be to undo the damage. I'll file for an injunction today, but we'll need to prepare for a court hearing." By the afternoon, the injunction was in motion. Emma returned home, bracing for what would come next. She didn't have to wait long. As expected, the homeowner association retaliated, delivering yet another notice to her door that evening. This time, it was a formal warning accusing her of disruptive behavior for organizing neighbors against the board. The letter threatened additional fines and even legal action if she didn't cease all anti-homeowner association activities. Emma read the letter with a bitter laugh. They were desperate, and it showed. She filed the notice away with the rest of her evidence and turned her attention to her growing support network. Sarah Jennings had rallied a small but vocal group of neighbors who were equally fed up with the homeowner association's overreach. Together, they strategized ways to keep the pressure on. The media attention Emma's story had garnered was also gaining momentum. The local news station aired a segment about her fight, highlighting the destruction of her property and the shady practices of the homeowner association. The story quickly went viral, with viewers across the state expressing outrage. Public sentiment was overwhelmingly on Emma's side, and even a few of her more timid neighbors began to speak out. The next week was a whirlwind. Emma met with reporters, coordinated with her neighbors, and prepared for the court hearing. Every night she pored over documents, determined to be ready for any argument the homeowner association's lawyers might throw at her. Despite the exhaustion, she felt a growing sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her backyard anymore, it was about standing up to a system that had bullied and exploited her community for too long. When the day of the hearing finally arrived, Emma felt a mixture of nerves and determination. The courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation as people filled the seats. Many of her neighbors had come to support her, along with Sarah and a few reporters. Karen Mitchell sat at the defense table, her face a mask of calm confidence. But Emma saw the flicker of uncertainty in Karen's eyes when their gazes met. The hearing began with opening statements. David presented a compelling argument, outlining the illegal reclassification of Emma's property and the homeowner association's failure to provide proper notice or obtain her consent. He cited the precedent case, emphasizing the parallels and the court's firm ruling on property rights. The homeowner association's lawyer countered with vague claims about community benefits and long-term planning, but their arguments lacked substance. Karen's attempts to justify the homeowner association's actions came across as arrogant and dismissive, which only seemed to irritate the judge. As the hearing continued, David presented Emma's meticulously gathered evidence photos of the construction, records of her property deed, and the homeowner association's own documents showing inconsistencies in their claims. He also called Sarah Jennings as a witness, who testified about the lack of transparency and the intimidation tactics used by the homeowner association. By the end of the day, the judge's frustration with the homeowner association was palpable. After a brief recess, he delivered his ruling. "The evidence is clear," the judge said firmly. "The homeowner association acted without proper authority in reclassifying private property and violated state law by proceeding with construction without the owner's consent. The injunction is granted, and the homeowner association is ordered to cease all construction activities immediately. Furthermore, the plaintiff is entitled to restitution for damages incurred." Relief flooded through Emma as the judge's words sank in. She had won. The courtroom erupted in whispers and murmurs, many of her neighbors smiling and nodding in support. Karen Mitchell's face turned a shade of pale as she realized the implications of the ruling. The homeowner association would be held accountable, and her grip on the community was slipping. But Emma's victory didn't end there. The media coverage of the case sparked a broader conversation about homeowner association overreach, prompting calls for reform at the state level. Emma became an unlikely advocate, sharing her story to help others stand up against similar injustices. In the weeks that followed, the partially constructed clubhouse was dismantled, and her backyard was restored with funds ordered by the court. Emma replanted her garden, reclaiming the sanctuary she had fought so hard to protect. Karen Mitchell and several board members resigned in disgrace, and a new, more transparent homeowner association leadership was elected. As Emma sat on her restored patio one evening, sipping tea and watching the sun set over her garden, she felt a profound sense of peace. The battle had been exhausting and at times overwhelming, but it had also been worth it. She had stood her ground, not just for herself but for her community, and in the end, she had proven that even in the face of powerful opposition, justice could prevail.